The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Building better, more sustainable connections to the land, sharing culture and proud histories of resistance and resilience. On this National Indigenous Peoples Day, we'll hear from some remarkable creators about their lives and their work. First, we speak to renowned architects featured in the TVO original documentary From Earth to Sky about the dynamism of Indigenous architecture. Then, filmmaker Tracey Deer reflects on her award-winning coming-of-age story set amidst terrifying times during the so-called Oka Crisis of 3 decades ago. It's Monday, June 21st, and that's all next on The Agenda. Their buildings speak for themselves. But how did they come to their profession as architects, often against all odds, and what animates them in the design process? That, happily, is the subject of a new TVO original documentary called From Earth to Sky, featuring a collective of accomplished Indigenous architects. And we have two with us tonight, as well as the filmmaker. Joining us now, and as is our custom, we'll introduce our guests from furthest away to closest to our studio. And so we welcome, in Phoenix, Arizona, Wanda Della Costa, the first female First Nations architect in Canada, now a professor at Arizona State University, teaching Indigenous planning, architecture, and construction. In Ottawa, Ontario, Douglas Cardinal, world-renowned architect and master builder, who was the first First Nations architect in Canadian history. And in Ontario's capital city, the filmmaker, Ron Chapman. He's the director of the TVO original documentary From Earth to Sky that has its world broadcast premiere tonight, right after this program. And we are so delighted to welcome, really, what a collection of talent we've got on this program tonight. This is fantastic. Ron, I'm going to start with you. You've done a lot of documentaries in the past, and I got to just start by asking, first of all, I've seen it. It's fantastic. It's gorgeous. What drew you to the subject in the first place?
It came to my attention a few years ago that a group of 18 Indigenous architects were making a proposal to represent Canada at the Venice Architectural Biennale. And in that proposal, they wanted to show the world what Indigenous architecture was. And I was fascinated by a couple of different things within this that drew me to the project. One was, what is Indigenous architecture, and how would they present that? How would they come up with language to show that to the world? Also, these were a group of architects from Turtle Island, which is the pre-borders before we made Canada and provinces and America and states. And so there were American, what we would call American and Canadian Indigenous architects in this mix. A lot of these Canadian architects don't recognize Canada as a sovereign nation, and yet there they are representing Canada, and I was curious how that could possibly be. And further, I wondered how 18 architects could agree on anything, because generally my understanding of architects is each one, it's all about me and my vision, and you get two together, and you know there's no finding common ground. But here, 18 architects were going to agree on how to make this presentation. So that was what made me want to investigate this and go further down the road.
Wonderful. Let's take a look at some of your work here. The clip, please, Sheldon.
It was my mother who told me that she felt that I would be an architect. So I applied and I was accepted at UBC. I was told at UBC that it would be impossible for me to be an architect. I could see the way Canada treated First Nations people. So I just pointed my car south, and I ended up in the School of Frank Lloyd Wright, and I met Frank Lloyd Wright.
And you became Canada's first Indigenous architect.
I guess I never looked at it that way.
But it's true. I'd like to know, Douglas Cardinal, how old were you when your mother said to you, I think you should be an architect someday?
I was 6 years old.
6 years old, my goodness. Now, okay, I think I know how old you are, so we're basically talking 8 decades ago, is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, there were obviously no other Indigenous architects around, so can you recall what you thought when she said that to you? Because obviously no role models, nobody for you to say, I want to be like that guy.
Well, the first thing I wanted to know was, and to study, what is an architect and what does he do? And what does he have to learn? And so my mother said I had to train myself in the arts, which I did. And she felt fundamental to architecture would be music. So she put me through the Royal Conservative Toronto music program. And there I learned music first. And I could see really later on in my life how music and architecture have a real strong relationship, because it's about structure, it's about harmony and balance. And many of my professors advised me that architecture was prose and music. And so I understood that from a very personal point of view with my study of music.
Gotcha. Wanda, I wonder if you could tell us what got you into architecture in the first place?
It's a good question. You know, most people dream of this profession since they're very small, but for me, it came through after my undergraduate degree. I went backpacking. It was supposed to be 6 months. It turned into a little over 7 years. I hit about 40 countries, and I realized through that trip and through the experience I had seeing all these beautiful cultures around the world that I was interested in cities and buildings and spaces for people.
And did the fact that you were both female and Indigenous hold you back at all?
I think I didn't really think of it back in the day. You know, it's more on my mind now, the fact that this may be an anomaly. But I didn't really see it that way at the time.
Okay. Ron, we've heard two stories here about how two of the giants of this business got into it, but you heard other stories as well. What are some of the other reasons that drew the people you chronicled into this field?
Well, I think all of them, of course, were fascinated by structure, by community. I mean, it's difficult for me to speak for them, but one thing that I think Wanda and Douglas can illuminate you on is, you know, the foundations and the precepts of Indigenous architecture. It is all about community, and they are all about community. And then how does the architecture then influence community, how people live, how they interact, and make it a better place. So I think, you know, that along with, as Douglas said, his was initially appreciation of music. Wanda was buildings and definitely design, having an artistic flair. All of those things come together. But again, it's, you know, to me, the biggest message came through. It's, you know, how can we help and encourage people to live in a better way? And I think that's, to me, what has driven most of them.
Douglas, I wonder if you could pick up on that, because when you watch the documentary, you can clearly see that there is an Indigenous style of architecture. I'm not sure I've got the vocabulary or the expertise or the understanding to be able to put into English how to describe that, but I bet you can. So take a crack at it if you would. How would you characterize or describe Indigenous architecture to somebody who didn't know what it was?
Well, for me, it is creating environments for people that are nurturing, loving, and caring environments that more or less follow the teachings of our grandmothers, our mothers, because we always listen to our mothers and listen to their voices and the mothers of our children, and implemented their decisions. That's the basis of our culture. We were, and those values are more maternal, and therefore they are more loving and caring and nurturing. And so I think that really is the kind of spaces within that we are inspired to develop. And therefore we also, through their teachings, always have ourselves and our environments connect with our Mother the Earth and be in harmony with our Mother the Earth, instead of being dominion over nature. We have to realize that being dominion over nature has caused all this trauma with our planet, this Earth right now, and that we have to change our mentality. We have to realize that we have to not be dominion over nature, because we are nature, and whatever we do affects everything around us, and particularly our planet as a whole. And so we have to be much more in symbiotic with our natural environment, and apply all that teachings of our elders, and all these values of our elders should be the values that are expressed in the environments that we create.
See, that describes it in a way that I never could. That's why we have you on the program to explain it, because I never could. But Wanda, I'd ask you to pick up on that, because I know when I was watching the documentary and seeing these glorious structures that you and Douglas are responsible for, and thinking, this is about as far away from 1960s brutalist East German architecture as it comes. So if you want to pick up on what Douglas said, what would you add to your characterization of Indigenous architecture?
Yeah, and I just want to lift up with something that Douglas talks about, which I think is really fundamental to Indigenous architecture, and that's really the value systems. So not only are we aiming to reconnect, there has been a lost history, a disconnection with, policies over the last couple of 100 years in Canada, and we're trying to reconnect those things. And so I think there's looking back in order to look forward, but as Douglas mentioned, it is about value systems. It is about cultural values. It is about social values. It is about values connecting with our natural world. And to add to that, I think what Indigenous architecture really aspires to be is really what Douglas alludes to, is that awakening of our connection, not only with other people, but our connection with nature. And that is probably the most important thing that we can bring forward at this time, in this, where we are right now in our world.
Right.
Yeah.
Ron, we can't not talk about racism if we're going to talk about indigeneity and architecture. And so we have two of the protagonists of your film here, but of course you spoke to others. And I wonder if you could share with us, the kinds of racism and racist incidents, the stories you heard through the course of putting this documentary together.
Well, I think all of them, dealt with some form of racism as they were growing up, and that's just Canada and America again, because some of them are American. We have survivors of residential schools, broken families, but I will say that was not the focus really of the documentary. I think it's important to have a sense of what they went through as their backstory. But to me, the documentary is really about their resilience and what that represents, and their strength in terms of overcoming the heinous history that they've had here in Canada and in the States, and the kind of genocide that was waged against them and their people, and this coming to life that they've had, and that they are championing, that Wanda and Douglas and Patrick, Tammy, the rest of these architects represent. They are incredibly strong individuals. They are successful individuals. They are talented individuals, and they are redefining, or not redefining, but they are trying to, I guess one of the terms I heard once was have a seat at the table again, to come back and to help influence us as we move forward to create a better world by integrating the values that they've had for thousands of years into our process now so that we can avert the disaster that we're all headed to. If we continue to ignore and walk like lemmings, into the ocean. So they have great counsel and advice and inspiration to give us from their teachings. They just want to share them.
All right. Well, to that end, Sheldon, I'm going to ask you, top of page 3, if you would bring up that image of the church. And Douglas, I want to ask you about this. Tell us about this, what we're looking at right now. What is this?
This is a Catholic church in Red Deer, Alberta. I grew up in Red Deer. And
you designed this? That's your design?
Yes, I designed it, and I thought it was very important to do that because when I had real issues with the church when I went through the having to be in the convent in Red Deer. And so for me, it was very important for me to almost do an act of reconciliation with the church. And it was very important for me to provide a loving and caring. And because I found to be creative, you can't be filled with anger.
Well, that's what I want to follow up on. That's
filled with loving and caring. It was very important for me to be able to come with a good heart, and the only way you can do that is through forgiveness and loving and caring. So I wanted to build that church as a sign of loving and caring, and the whole environment I wanted to create.
That's what I want to know, how you got there, because you're dealing with the Catholic Church, whose role in the residential schools story is well known, including the one you went to. So how did you get your heart to a place where you could collaborate with the Catholic Church to build such a magnificent structure?
For me, it was very important to do that because I feel that the only way that you can really make a difference in the world is through caring and loving and caring, and build bridges. And the only way you can build a bridge is to try to understand everything you can about the church. And I had an amazing priest commission me the church, Father Merckx, and he was a very loving and caring individual. And so it was, you have to, and he was really willing for me to be able to express the new liturgy into the church, which more embracive and caring for people. And so it takes two people to build a bridge, And if you have somebody that's wanting to be able to work with you and to be able to share the concern about working together and coming together in respect and loving and caring, then you need to take the opportunity of doing that. And for him, it was very, he was an amazing individual, and I felt that I had to properly serve him and his vision of the church.
Understood. Okay.
And the Archbishop is the same.
All
the
right.
Archbishop supported and financed it. Felt the same. He was an amazing Archbishop, and when he saw the design and the loving care we both put into it, he said, when it is finished, I'll open the building, but make sure to put 12 consecration stones in the walls so I can consecrate it as a cathedral, which he did.
Very nice. Wanda, let's put the spotlight over on you if we can. Mr. Director, if you would, let's see a clip from our documentary featuring Wanda.
My mother grew up on the reservation, on the reserve, and she went through residential schools. The earliest memories, I would call it my lived experience, is going up to the res where all of your cousins are, where all of your kinship connections are. There's a particular project that I did that was just recently completed in the city of Calgary. The Nistatapasini Early Learning Center. It was designed for Indigenous students within an urban setting to learn through a traditional Indigenous learning model. I think it's profound that in one generation it's completely changed.
Can you tell us, Wanda, what it means to you to have participated in that project in Calgary?
That it's a hard project to talk about. So are we live? I think what's important about that project, you know, my mother used to go back into the schools and bring culture. She was a liaison worker in the city of Edmonton, and she would bring culture back to the students in the city of Edmonton. You know, when you bring, you know, she would cook fry bread in the classrooms, and she would light sweetgrass in the classrooms, and she would try to bring that culture back. And so I think for me, this school is a continuation of that work. So we sat down so long and for so many meetings with all of the elders in the region, and all of the we sat down with all of the elders in the region and all of the community members and asked them what it is like, because you're changing the paradigm, right, of Indigenous education. We asked, what is it like to teach from an Indigenous worldview in a contemporary urban setting, and how would that alter a school? And so I think the task at hand was really one of innovation. It was one of productive disruption. And it was one of listening, of how we begin to kind of go back to those original ancestral worldviews and how we bring them into a contemporary space. And so I think the challenge was really an exciting one. And that particular school has become an early pilot for a number of other schools that we're designing across Canada that also want to reflect Indigenous ways of knowing in a contemporary environment. So I think it was a landmark study. It was a long time ago, but I think it was one of the most important buildings that I've done in my profession.
Ron, I can't help but notice out of the corner of my eye on the monitor here in the studio, sorry, I'm going to bust you here, buddy, but you know, when Wanda was giving that answer, you were wiping away tears. What is it about this story that gets to you?
Well, you know, it's not just her story; it's the whole story. I mean, it's interestingly enough, you have Douglas here, who's Canada's, North America's first Indigenous architect, and you know, to be an architect when he came in, he would have had to have renounced his rights as a native. He changed that. He's, you know, the elder of the group, and he opened the door for everyone. And you have Wanda, who bookended the film. And you know, when I visited her and shot her in Phoenix, you know, she's teaching the next generation. Wanda and the other architects, they were able to, you know, they only had Douglas to look to, and he inspired them to go forward and have the strength to become what they became. And Wanda is now, you know, I remember that great community project that you were doing with all those kids. You must have had 50 Indigenous kids working away, developing looks for the local community. It's just so amazing to see the transition. And I think there hasn't been an interview I've done with Wanda where she doesn't break down and start crying 5 times in the interview, and it's kind of contagious.
That is true.
Well, that's
true.
You know, given the kind of contagions we've been dealing with over the last 15 months, this is a kind of contagion I think we can all get into. Wanda, maybe you could pick up the story there. The young Indigenous students who are studying to become architects today, can you compare and contrast what experiences they're having to deal with compared to what you and, of course, Douglas back in the day would have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the testimony from the students, just having them have an Indigenous architecture professor, you know that 72% of architecture professors in North America are Caucasian. So just to have a woman, female Native American teaching them architecture, their testimony said that it has changed the course of their career. So we've had students finish their undergrad in architecture and want to come back and study more. And now I have students that want to come and teach architecture. So it just creates this opening for them because they didn't know, like I didn't know, that there was such a thing as architecture, Indigenous architecture, and how it was so impactful for our lifeways and the continuity of our culture and preservation and representation. There's so many vital facets to this work that I think now I realize why I'm here. This is part of my purpose, is to give that to the next generation.
Wonderful. Without question, and I'm going to ask our director to bring up these images here, we're going to show some pictures now of what is plain and simple one of the most famous buildings in the entire country. This is the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec, what they used to call Hull when I was a kid. And, well, Douglas Cardinal, this is your work on display. Can you tell us, boy, I remember when this building opened and visited it and thought to myself, I've never seen anything like this before ever in my life. What were you hoping to convey with this design?
I wanted to convey the vision that my elders gave me for the design. I asked my elders to present a vision for me and to be able to have me inspired by their vision, and they wanted it to be a place for all people to come together in peace and harmony and learn from each other and be enriched by other people's culture and knowing other people's culture. And it was a place where all cultures could come together. And when we had that vision very powerfully, and I met with Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, he had the same vision. So our visions were the same, really, of what kind of building we should design for the National Museum, because he wanted it to be one of the symbols of nationhood. He wanted to develop symbols of nationhood, like a gallery to enshrine our arts, a museum to enshrine our cultures, and a constitution to enshrine our rights. So he regarded those as symbols of nationhood. And his symbol of nationhood is where all the cultures could come together and celebrate that we are so different and so unique and so diverse. And we had so much that we could share with each other and learn from each other and learn how varied the human family is and how wonderful that is to be able to, and that we would be enriched by other people's culture. And that was his vision, and it was virtually the same vision as our elders out west that inspired me as well.
Let's take a look at one more clip from the documentary From Earth to Sky. Sheldon, if you would.
I always laugh when you tell the story about how most of the residential school survivors either want the building burned down, or they want it saved to be changed.
I was always a big fan of blowing them up. To have something plunk down that's so foreign, right?
3 stories,
right.
Steeple
Can
on
you
it.
imagine what the kids must have felt like coming from their small communities and having to be accommodated here? You know,
a monster.
A monstrous kind of building, eh?
Totally. Architecture of intimidation.
Architecture of intimidation. Wanda, we've got about a minute and a half left here, and I just would be interested in your view on what we should do with all these residential school buildings that still dot the landscape of this country.
It's so interesting you asked that question, because I feel like that there's a very polarized, if you ask our communities, there's polarized opinions. There are those who believe that we should keep them as a memory of what has happened in our Canadian past, and that there are others, similar, what Brian was talking about in the video, that want them demolished. On the one hand, my perspective is we should keep them. They are part of our Canadian history. We don't want the truths to go away. We want people to know that this is part of our past. So that would be my perspective. There's one 2 hours west of here in Brantford, Ontario, that they've turned into a museum. And I can just tell you, having been there a couple of times, it tells the story. And it's an important story to be told. And they've done a great job with that there. So, okay, that's good to know. Yeah. Let me just finally say here that the documentary that we've been talking about will air on TVO tonight, of course, immediately after this program. And it's going to be part of a very important film festival on Manitoulin Island, of all places, the Wingesh International Film Festival on Manitoulin Island. And I think, unfortunately, because of COVID, we're not going to be able to gather in person to watch it. But the festival, Ron, have I got this right? The festival is still digital, and from July 8th to 11th, people can go to the website and they can check out the film, and it's going to happen in that way, as so many things have over the past 15 months. Have I got that right?
You got it. That's it. Manitoulin. Wingesh Film Festival. Okay, terrific. That's WENGESKHK, International Film Festival. I can't thank the three of you enough for coming onto our program tonight and sharing your views on this most wonderful documentary. Ron, you've done it again. Wanda Della Costa, Douglas Cardinal, Ron Chapman, good wishes to all of you going forward. We are all, of course, witnesses to history, but some of us stand much closer to it than others, and as such, it leaves a deeper impression. Tracey Deer is an accomplished writer, producer, and director who has worked on television shows such as Anne with an E and Mohawk Girls. And now she has her first feature film. It's called Beans. Set during the so-called Oka Crisis in the summer of 1990, it's been called the best coming-of-age film of the year and won several awards, including, just last month, Canadian Screen Awards for Best First Feature Film and Best Motion Picture. And it brings Tracey Deer to our virtual studio tonight from Montreal, Quebec. Tracey, so great to have you here. I gotta tell you, I love this movie, but boy, you do not spare a thing. Let's just show a little clip of this and then we'll come back and chat, okay? Sheldon, if you would, let's go.
My name is Tigahandekwa, or you can call me Beans. Everybody does.
Beans is the nickname of the protagonist in the film, we should just say off the top here. And Tracey, there are moments when I'm watching this movie and I'm thinking, did this really happen? I sure hope this did not happen, because this is really too much. So let's start there. How much of this film was autobiographical?
So the emotional through line of the film is very much representative of my coming of age story. In terms of all of the big historical events, the recreations that you see in the film, these are all moments that did happen. I personally wasn't at all of them. I put my character there in order to tell this story, but I was at some of them. And so some of these scenes in the film are ripped directly from my memory, and I endeavored to recreate them exactly as I experienced them. So it's a combination. It's a combination of things I actually experienced myself, historical moments that actually happened, and some moments created to represent the emotional moments that I went through in my coming of age.
Yeah, I get you. I guess you would have been a kid of about 12 years old when the Oka Crisis happened. So I'm wondering how influential all of that was in your, I guess, eventual decision down the road to become a filmmaker.
So it was very influential in the filmmaker I have become. I will say that. That summer really shattered my sense of safety, my sense of self-worth. And it led me down a very, very dark path, a very hopeless path for much of my adolescence. And it was the resiliency and the strength of my people that I'm so grateful for, because I was able to climb out of that darkness. And the Oka crisis and what I experienced there is really now my fuel in all the work that I do and all the bridge building I seek to do with the stories I tell. I never want something like that to happen again, and I never want another Indigenous child to have that kind of coming of age. In terms of it inspiring me to become a filmmaker, I was already on that path. I had started watching movies at home. I was just enthralled with these different worlds and the safe space to feel my emotions. So I was 12 years old when I was hit by the thunderbolt to become a filmmaker, and I was also 12 years old when I went through this really devastating moment, and it began this journey of figuring out who I am as an Indigenous person and what that means to be an Indigenous person in this country.
How old is the young girl that you cast to play Beans?
In the film, the actress Gawandia was 13 years old when we filmed this.
How did you find her? She was amazing.
I know. She is incredible. She is a star. So we did an open casting call across the country to find all of the young talent for the film. We had kids from across the country send in videos from their kitchens and from their living rooms, which we are now quite used to living in this pandemic and with Zoom. But back then, it was a new thing for them to film themselves in their wherever they're comfortable and send it to us. We ended up coming up with a short list for each role, and we flew the kids and their families into Toronto for a 2-day acting workshop where they got to learn more about what it is to be an actor, how to access your emotions, and I was there for the entire thing. We didn't do any scenes from Beans. It was really there. It was really a fun time for the kids to learn about acting and to spend time with each other. And after that, we did another audition process. They were all there, and I was able to pair them up in sibling pairs and see what kind of chemistry they had. And it was after that we found 3 of our lead roles. And then the last role of Ruby, the youngest character, I discovered her a little bit later, and she comes from my community of Ganawage.
How do you have a conversation with a 13-year-old girl or younger, in the case of Ruby, and say, look, for the next several weeks of your life, we're going to put you in circumstances where we're going to scare the crap out of you, essentially. And with the lead character as well, with Beans, we're going to put you in some sexually provocative and very difficult circumstances for the purposes of telling this story. How does that conversation go?
Well, the conversation isn't that. The conversation is, here's the script and here's the story, and here's how I want to film it. So on the page and on the screen, it is very scary and very ugly and very traumatic. There are many scenes that are very traumatic, but we set out in telling this story. We set out with the goal of not causing trauma and also having as much fun as possible. I believe, especially when there are kids involved, kids should not be working. There are children. So for them to come on board and do this with me, they needed to be having fun. They needed to be enjoying themselves.
Tracey, so many of these scenes did not look fun, I got to tell you.
I know. And that is the magic of movie making. When it was all pieced together, you see what it is. But on the day, there were many different things we did to protect the kids and keep the energy on set very positive and very stress-free. And I know it's hard to imagine once you see the actual film. But for instance, a lot of the scenes where there are some very difficult subject matter going on, our shooting plan actually has the kids very much removed from a lot of it. So the kids use their imagination. I give them an overview of like what's going on around them. And in the shots where you see them crying or screaming, running, scared. That is all of their imagination. So the kids never saw the other side of it until they saw the final cut of the film. And that, I think that's a real testament to their talent, because you do feel that they are in the midst of all of that and they are reacting directly to those stresses. But in fact, for many of it, they are surrounded by a very supportive team. Of course, their family is there, and all of these kids became very, very close. And they had a really good time. In between certain takes, there were massive giggle fests going on. Gawendio, who would go from a scene that I find just so heart-wrenching, in the motel, she has an emotional breakdown in that bathroom. And she went to this performance place that is extraordinary. And then as soon as we yelled cut, and I have tears streaming down my face because the performance is reaching me, she looked to me with a big smile on her face and said, "How was that?" And I just told her that was the most incredible thing. Let's go and check to see how your father's doing. And we left the bathroom, and this incredible young woman is skipping down the hall. You know, she knows what she just accomplished. And she comes into the next room to see her father, to see her friends, and her friends, the other actors, are all there, and they're all giving her so many like, "Wow, I can't believe you did that." And her father is stricken. I'm stricken. But she was having a wonderful time and filled with pride at what she was doing. And I think that's what makes a great actor, is there's the role and then there's who you are. And that was very much encouraged on the set, is when you are not in the role, you come back to yourself. And that is an entirely different emotional space to be in. Well, it's very well directed and extremely well edited then, because I'll tell you, you certainly convey the impression that these kids are in the midst of this world coming in on them. And, well, let me follow up with this. What percentage of the cast and crew would you say on your picture were of Indigenous background? So, of course, all of the Indigenous roles in the film were played by Indigenous people. They were not all Mohawk. They represented nations from across the country. In regards to our crew, you know, I absolutely always do seek to hire as many Indigenous people as possible. And over the years, working out here with Mohawk girls, I've developed wonderful relationships with a number of crew. So I certainly cannot say it's a giant percentage, unfortunately, but our hair and makeup team were all Indigenous. Who else? Well, I asked the question for this reason, because I assume with a significant percentage of indigeneity on the set and in the post-production and so on, that that you as the filmmaker have to take into account being careful not to re-traumatize people who may have this story as a very significant part of their past. How do you do that? Yes. So how we did that, it was very, very important to me. Again, all of our Mohawk extras in the film, many of them were survivors of this summer. And a big first piece of that is informed consent. So everyone knew exactly what they were getting into. Oftentimes when you're hiring extras, they don't know what they're coming to do. You're booked for a time, you're booked for a place, and you show up, and sometimes that's really fun. You find out you're going to be a fireman. You find out you're going to be at a mall. And I did not want anyone showing up to discover they were going to be reliving a traumatic event. I also felt the same way about all of our non-Indigenous extras. I didn't want anyone coming to set and being surprised and uncomfortable that they had to play a racist. So there was informed consent across the board. So everyone that did come wanted to be there, and they had their own reasons for wanting to come and be a part of it. We also had 3 Indigenous social workers there on our most traumatic day, when we recreated the mob throwing stones at the women, children, and elderly. We had a PTSD specialist there, and these support workers were there for everybody. We didn't film any of these traumatic recreations within the communities that they took place. So we found locations a good 40 to 45 minutes outside of the communities this took place in, because it was not about, opening wounds at all. We've come a long way as communities over the 30 years to repair all of that. So we found communities outside that were, again, also very welcome. They knew exactly what we were coming to do. There was no sneakiness. Everyone knew what we were coming to do, and they welcomed us. They wanted to be a part of telling the story, making sure the story got out there. I'm trying to think of what else we did.
Well, that's a pretty good list right there.
Thank you.
This did take place 30 years ago, and I remember it well. This, of course, a dispute over a developer who wanted to build a golf course on what was ancestral burial land for Indigenous communities in Oka, Quebec. And it's 31 years ago. But how much of the feeling of this story do you think is still very present day?
It is entirely current. So the film is a period piece, 31 years ago, as you said, but the themes are all still playing out across this country. The damage that was done to me as a little girl is still being done to our children across the country. So even though it is a period piece, it is still, it's a current story with a very vital message that things do need to change right now, so that this is no longer the coming of age story of our children, because it is devastating and it destroys hope. And it just has to stop. I'm tired of it being an unsafe place for Indigenous people. It just really does have to stop.
All right. Having said that, you were on a program in 2008 talking about your documentary at the time, Club Native, which is set on a Mohawk reserve in Kahnawake in Quebec. And what emerges from that conversation is that there are two unspoken rules. Don't marry a white person and don't have a child with a white person. Now that's 2008. Has there been a shift in thinking since then, in your view?
So the answer is complicated. I think that there is a younger generation coming up thinking about preservation of culture in a different way. But there's definitely still a generation that believes in that blood quantum mentality. And that mentality is often passed through family. So it's still a very complicated and controversial issue back home, and I think in communities across the country.
Well, okay. How personal can I get with you here?
I don't know. How personal do you want to go?
Well, who are you married to?
I'm married to a Quebecois man. His name is Sylvain, and he's wonderful.
Is he Indigenous?
He is not. He's Quebecois.
And is that a problem for some in your community?
Yes, I think it is a problem for some people in my community. I do have the support of my family, and I do have the support of some people as well. And I have the love of an incredible man in my life. I have a wonderful family. I have support. I have safety. And that's what really matters to me.
You know, when you watch your movie, you could come away from that film thinking, I cannot imagine the Francophone community of Quebec and the Indigenous community located in Quebec ever getting together on anything. There's just way too much enmity and hostility there. And yet I guess you are an example that that's not true. Do you think of yourself that way?
I do think we represent how bridges can be built, and I do think that love is the way that we build those bridges. What was really interesting when I first met Sylvain and we first started dating, and we got into how strongly we feel about our cultures. I did have all of those past messages in my head of how would this ever work? And we very quickly came to realize that he feels just as passionate about his culture as I feel about mine. And that doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. And there was great understanding that was reached when I realized we're actually more alike than we are different. And he wants to celebrate and live in his culture and not impede on others. And that is exactly the way what we want as well. And so very quickly, I felt understood. He felt respected, and that bridge was built a lot quicker than I thought.
That's encouraging. Did he have any trouble in his Francophone community trying to justify his marriage to you?
Not that I'm aware. No, his family has been very welcoming, very curious, very interested, lots of questions. I think that has gone smoothly.
Well, that's very hopeful. Let me read back a quote of yours that you gave in an interview last month, and it goes like this. I grew up, you say, feeling very invisible and very voiceless and very unimportant. And now I have this platform. It's very overwhelming. It's very exciting. It's very fulfilling. It's also difficult because there's so many that don't get to have their dreams come true. I don't want to be one of the few. I want to be one of the many. Okay, so where are we with Indigenous filmmaking today? Are you one of the few or are you one of the many?
So I remember that quote, and I was crying in that interview. So you picked a good quote because it just brought me right back. I think there are definitely many of us, but many of us are still struggling to be heard and to be supported as storytellers. I do think we are in an extraordinary moment right now, and those doors are opening, which is fantastic. I do think that there needs to be a much bigger platform. We need more support. So I do feel right now one of few, because we need way more. We need much more representation, not only in this business, in this industry, but across the country in all industries. So I do think that statement, I said it a month ago. I do think it's valid and current, but that is in no way to dismiss all of my incredible colleagues who are all out there doing the same. You know, I think we are all one of few, and we just want to keep building our community of storytellers and giving them the platform that they deserve.
You know, I think it's fair to say that one thing that the discovery of the 215 did, and I would add your film to this as well, once it gets into theaters, once the movies get open, the cinemas get open, and we can actually go to the cinema and watch your movie, you know, there's a potential right now for some kind of reckoning or new understanding that heretofore has escaped a lot of people in this country. And I guess I'm just curious as to what you think your film can do to contribute to what could be, you know, a really important historic moment for this place.
I really hope that for the film. I've been thinking about this a lot. You know, it took a very long time to make. It took a very long time to write and figure out this story, to revisit those memories. But I think it was all necessary to be out in this moment. I think if the film came out a few years ago, I don't know if the country would have been ready to go on that journey and take in the messages of the film and hopefully open their hearts. So it all played out the way it needed to come out now. And I really do hope that people leave the film loving Beans and her family and wanting to go out into the world to do what they can to make things better. You know, society is the problem, and that is not on Indigenous people to fix. We are doing all of the work that we can do on our end, but society, the problems of society, that is up to Canadians to address. And so I I hope that the film is a call to action. I hope that they leave wanting to be our allies and wanting to do what they can to make things better.
National Indigenous Peoples Day. What does that mean to you?
Well, I like to celebrate being an Indigenous person and celebrate all of the incredible beauty and strength and resilience of my people every day. But I do love that the country has put a focus and given us this day to celebrate all that we are. But I don't want us to just have one day. I do want us to be in the minds of Canadians every day, because it's been way too long that we haven't been in anyone's mind for far too long. So it's wonderful. I will be proud and I will celebrate, and I will continue to do that every single day thereafter.
Hear, hear. I can't wait for the theaters to get open again so your movie can play and people can see it. And we're really grateful that you spent so much time with us here on TVO tonight talking about Beans, which is just a terrific picture and will really, never mind put you back in the time, but it'll give you so much to think about today as well. Thanks, Tracey. Great to be with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And that is the agenda for Monday, June 21st, 2021. From Elon Musk to Jeff Bezos, it's an understatement to say billionaires have financially made out quite nicely during this pandemic. Tomorrow, writer Anand Giridharadas explains why he believes the amount of tax they pay, or rather don't pay, is indefensible. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
The Agenda is always on. To catch up on conversations from this week or any week, visit our website, tvo.org/theagenda, or our YouTube page at youtube.com/theagenda. It's all there for whenever you want to watch.